Hello, welcome to the Moonstruck podcast produced by Riot Radio. I'm Ryan, and today we'll be discussing dopamine, serotonin, and equilibrium. And these are kind of some interesting concepts we're going to be discussing because today we're really affected by a lot of these neurotransmitters that exist within the body, and we don't typically dive too deep into them, but we do regularly feel the effects of these neurotransmitters, which is why it's so imperative that we really understand how they work if we're going to understand our human body and how to connect with it. So we're going to go to a picture, the first slide here, that just kind of illustrates some of the aspects of each of these neurotransmitters. And again, we're going to be mainly focusing on dopamine, the reward chemical, and serotonin, the mood stabilizer, today. And dopamine really emphasizes that feel-good hormone, and we're going to be kind of diving deep into how to maintain it at a healthy balance. And I think that facilitating this healthy source of dopamine is really important to kind of expanding our consciousness. So we're going to kind of talk about this and dive a little bit in depth here. So I think that we should start off by first kind of getting into some of the mechanisms that are associated with this, especially in the way we interact with it in modern day society. So we've all heard of dopamine detox getting big on YouTube and big on the internet recently. And the reason why is because we've now invented a society in which we are so used to using things like cell phones and things that kind of release those short stunts of dopamine in the bloodstream, and kind of create this mental pattern in which we kind of get sucked into using these devices unconsciously, because dopamine is the pleasure reward system. So really overusing it or overtaxing it can cause decreases in things like motivation, fast release chemicals into the bloodstream, causing mood swings, quick ups and quick downs, and reduce attention span. And these are some of the biggest modern day impacts of this going on at the moment. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into these. I just want to introduce them briefly. I'm also going to introduce serotonin now, which is a slower release chemical, and it has a more steadier flow than dopamine, and it is a mood stabilizer essentially. And one of the best ways to actually get it is eating things that are high in it, like dark chocolate, being out in the sun, for example, doing things like exercise, which also release endorphins, which is another of these neurotransmitters listed here. But these all work together to kind of form a symphony in the body of hormones, and it really is imperative that we understand this. And we'll come back to me, but we're going to really take a look at their impacts on how they affect the human body in the form of things like addiction to dopamine and cell phone addiction, more crucially, because we are not really in the practice of taking breaks away from our devices as much as we probably should, given their impacts on our physiology and our psychology also. As we know, these things are really connected and deeply interlinked. So it's important that we build not just a good relationship with the body, but also the mind. So understanding that these chemicals can be addictive and can be misused and abused within the body is something we really kind of have to internalize at a deep level so we can understand their impacts. Now, coming back to dopamine and the attention span problem, this is something that a lot of people talk about now, dopamine detox, and what does that really mean? It means that you're resetting your baseline dopamine level. So if you're using your phone 24/7, and we're not going to, make this, exclusive to only the pretty image of, social media and whatnot. Let's talk about the facts here. There are things like, pornography on phones, and this is the most accessible time to actually tap into all these different things online, and we literally have a drug in our hand that we release chemicals into our bloodstream with all the time. So understanding that there are big psychological impacts to these things as a result of misusing the pathway can lead to things like depression. And there have been a whole lot of studies actually linked recently from Harvard and Stanford to things like dopamine addiction in correlation with things like depression and basically the overuse of these pathways creating certain unhealthy behaviors and neurological patterns. So if you want to check out any of these links, any of these studies, they will be listed in the description. So I invite you to do your own research. Don't just take my word for it. But we're not going to, sugarcoat this. We're going to really look at the facts here and what they say in terms of basically these big issues around becoming addicted to these chemicals, because over time, as we do talk about, a lot of these things do become subconscious patterns of subconscious programming. So if you're somebody who struggles with, maintaining motivation or maintaining consistency in life, or I guess healthy moods, or things like we tend to label a lot of these conditions these days with things like bipolar disorder and ADHD and all these things that are just kind of blankets that we throw over things. We throw blanket terms over things to kind of diagnose them or put them in a box. But we're not here to put things in a box. We're here to destroy the box and really get to the root of things here. So how do we do this? How do we really attack this issue? One of the biggest ways is by resetting your dopamine. As I've said, dopamine detoxing. You can do this by abstaining from your phone for a certain period of time. There is a culture really now going around dopamine detox, which kind of has the wrong idea with it. They make it more about, dopamine challenge, like 7 days or whatever. This is not really the best way to approach this kind of stuff, because you're looking to only abstain from it for a certain time period. It's almost like you're not really buying into the idea. You're just suppressing your desire to use your device. So by taking breaks from your device naturally, and as a result of you actually doing other things or investing your time in other places, is a much more healthy way to actually manifest success in some of these areas when it comes to resetting these neurotransmitters. So attention span is one of the biggest problems that we now have in today's society. It seems like everybody is getting ADHD. I could be considered among that group, actually. And one of the things I don't do, though, is identify myself with that label. And the reason I don't do that is because you're buying into something that is not really aiding you in any way. If you think of buying into an idea, you want to make sure you buy into an idea that is supporting your greatest health or your greatest goals. So by identifying with something that does not serve you, you're basically saying to your body, it's okay for me to produce these chemicals that are not aiding me. But it's really a cop out. It's an enabling system, and we need to really realize that we have the ability to shape our own destiny, and we have basically to take back our accountability. We have to say that I am in control of my own destiny, and I'm going to decide what it's going to be. If I want to feel motivated and I want to do things and I want to set goals and I want to achieve them, then that's what I'm going to do. And we can't really allow ourselves to get sucked back into that spiral. So abstaining with a clear conscience and not having that innate desire to reach for your device is something that is a state that we want to achieve in this type of situation. So this kind of goes into, you know, for example, we're taking a break from our device for a certain amount of time to detox from it. But doing that and saying that, okay, let me go outside for the day and, I'll let all my messages be for, just one day or whatever. And, and that's the last time you ever think about it for the day. That's a much healthier mindset than, oh, I have to force myself to do activities or do exercises that's not being on my phone because you're still thinking about it, right? So to do something genuinely and with the intention in your heart to actually bring about some type of change is really important and really imperative in what we're talking about. So to go into serotonin, because this is actually helped produced by sunlight, for example, this is so important when it comes to overall mood stabilization. And I refer to this neurotransmitter actually as Sera because I think of it as serotonin, or Sera wakes you up in the morning, and melatonin or Mel puts you to sleep at night, because those are the neurotransmitters associated with waking and going to sleep. So these really play big impacts in not just feeling good and mood stabilization, but overall mental health. And when it comes to things like sleep and creating good sleep patterns, this is so important. So as we can see here, serotonin is something that actually regulates your mood. Dopamine is something that regulates motivation. That's why the overuse of it makes you feel depressed and, like you have no forward motion and like you're not doing stuff, right? Because you burnt it out. So resetting that back to baseline and saying that, the brain feel good hormone that usually has a tendency to want more and is potentially very addictive, can be moderated in certain circumstances. Like, for example, say you're running a race and you get first place and you get a trophy or whatever. That is a form of dopamine, a reward system that says, I feel good. But it's not addictive because you're only getting it once, right? If you keep, like, for example, if every day you were running a race and, you came first and, you got a reward, you wouldn't feel the same way over a certain amount of time because you become accustomed to it. It's something, a norm now. So we're really trying to break away from that addictive pattern is what we're really talking about here, and resetting ourselves. So to do that, we can do things like go outside. We could be in the sunlight, and serotonin, which we've talked about, the mood stabilizer, is actually important when not just waking up, but really developing consciousness and connection with awareness, because it is a mood stabilizer that says, I feel good, but I've had enough. I know when to stop, right? So it really creates that sense of equilibrium instead of a state of just pure addiction and overuse. So it's a lot less addictive chemical and neurotransmitter than dopamine is. But the important thing to notice about serotonin is that it does stimulate the pathway a bit more. We could come back to me. We could come back to me. We So it does activate more actually neural pathways within the body and in the brain, and so it has an overall greater impact on us than dopamine has, because dopamine actually stimulates less pathways. So and it stands to reason because it's a short release, right? So serotonin, as I said earlier, is a lot more of a slow wave that actually balances things out and is meant to sustain and cultivate happiness. And when we're inside scrolling on our phones on TikTok and turning ourselves into TikTok brains, then we do not have that. We cut ourselves off from sunlight, we cut ourselves off from a source of serotonin, and thus cutting ourselves off from a sense of happiness and a sense of place in the universe or in the cosmos. So understanding that the slow release, the slow up, slow down is necessary for the cultivation of not just awareness, but overall mood health and mood stabilization, as well as battling things like depression and really giving you that energy to revitalize yourself. Like the sun is rejuvenating, it's plasma, it's energy, and we are revitalized when we go in the sun, because our bodies are meant to be outside. We're beings of nature. We're not meant to have cell phones. This is a development of humans, but we can't forget that we're beings of nature first. So we have to consider these things like deep neurotransmitters within the brain when we're talking about advancing ourselves as human beings. So you might even think of, sunlight as almost a natural cure. Well, I wouldn't say the word cure, but I would say maybe treatment to things like depression, which have been associated with cell phone use and cell phone addiction. If you want, you could check out one of the links that Harvard did on cell phone use and dopamine levels. There's also one that is done on cell phone use, dependency, and depression. And there's one done on serotonin, sunlight, and battling depression, which is actually done by Nature. That's the link, Nature. So, and there's one more that's also on serotonin and dopamine in the case of depression. And you can check those out, because I always recommend that you guys do your own research. Don't just take my word for it. But it's really imperative that we understand that these have such a big impact, especially in such a fast-moving society that we have now come to cultivate and come to live in. Because a world where everything moves fast, you're much likely to be exposed to the shorter neurotransmitter, which is dopamine. But if that gets out of control, which it tends to do, because we always feel like there's no time, because 5 seconds and then scroll, maybe not even 5 seconds, it's probably more likely 3 seconds and then scroll on your phone. It really takes an amount of time to cultivate deep health within the body and deep awareness and deep growth. And these can't be done when you hang on to a thought for 3 seconds and it's gone, right? So learning how to reset yourself and learning how to be at a baseline and stability and equilibrium, that is such an important word that we're going to get to near the end of this show, equilibrium, because that is what really leads to overall health. When you're a wave going like this all the time, when you're in phase, you can't hang on to things very quickly, because you're always jumping onto the next vibration, right? You're always jumping onto something else. And that's essentially what's happening when we scroll on our devices, or when we watch pornography or whatever. there's just short releases and boom, it's gone, and you want it again, and it becomes addictive. So breaking that pattern is really essential to understanding ourselves and understanding why we might have these feelings of low self-esteem and depression and self-doubt, and like we can't hang on to a thought for very long or have the inability to focus. So all these are really side effects of these things we talk about. So looking at it from different perspectives, looking at it from the outside now, looking at it from the outside and saying, okay, well, we can see that something's happening and it's not necessarily affecting us in the best way. Let's take a step back and analyze what chemicals are actually in the bloodstream and what's going on a deep level, so we can really determine what we need to do to reset ourselves so we can be that best version of ourselves, so we can be who we want to be. And that takes awareness, which is cultivated, again, by serotonin. So let's talk about some dopamine detox methods. I was going to leave this for later to the end, but I think we're on a good roll today. So let's get into some dopamine detox methods. We can talk about things like doing things to increase neuroplasticity. Someone could actually do this by juggling, which is actually, I think there was a German study actually done on this, that jugglers actually have an increased level of neuroplasticity. I didn't link that in here, but you, again, guys, do your own research. But neuroplasticity is actually something that is activated and increased by dopamine hits and serotonin. Obviously, serotonin increases that connection a lot more, as seen with the pathway activation of it. But it is really important that we understand that both of these have important roles in this, and that they both need to work together to really maximize the benefits. If you have one chemical always going out of balance in the body, then there's always going to be a part of the body that is out of balance. That's just the way it works. So doing things also like exercise. Exercise releases those chemicals, again, endorphins, which are important for pain killing and mood stabilization. And they again, they work hand in hand with serotonin and all these other chemicals. And doing that actually is a way of naturally and physically detoxing the body from these chemicals, because when you exercise, you sweat, and when you sweat, you are releasing toxins from the body. So you are really saying to your body, I want to clear the system, I want to cleanse it out, I want to reset to the state that I can be in if I put in the effort, if I am willing to seek out long-term happiness and long-term goals, instead of, just short ones that I could find on my phone just scrolling, right? Because essentially that's what dopamine relates to. It relates to goals. So combining these together in this process of detoxing is important. And when you look at these videos on the internet concerned with dopamine detox and whatnot, they often don't tell you that a lot of these chemicals are interlinked, and you can't just look at one without looking at the others, because, again, as I said, that's not how the body works. The body, you can almost think of as a symphony, and if the flutes are playing out of tune, then eventually the whole orchestra is going to sound like garbage, right? So we don't want it to sound like garbage. We don't want to disappoint Squidward and have him have a crappy band in front of him. So let's really get into some of these symptoms of withdrawal now that we can expect from going through this process. You can expect to be somewhat irritable for the first couple of days. You can expect to be somewhat clinging to your device even though you're not supposed to be on it. You can, like, pretty much find any excuse to use it. Like, oh, I just got a text message from, this person. I should probably check that. But it's really just you trying to find yourself an excuse to use that thing. And that's one of the symptoms of withdrawal. Because, again, the body does not like change. It doesn't like readapting to patterns, but we have consciousness and we are conscious beings, and if we're going to express that and utilize it to its fullest extent, we need to let the body know that, hey, we're not going to make chemicals that are going to impede our progress, so let's really figure out which ones we need and do what it takes to alleviate ourselves of them. And we can expect other things, mood fluctuations, as I said. You can expect that maybe the body is acting out in some ways, not like muscle spasms or anything, but more mental spasms, if you will, in the sense that you are going to be in a state of irritability. You're going to feel like something is not quite right, something is missing, and that is typical. And some of us go through this all the time without even realizing it, because eventually this can really relate to anything, not just cell phones. I wanted to make cell phones a point today because it's something so accessible and so utilized by so many people on the planet. But this can really occur in anything. This can occur in things like addiction to alcohol, or addiction to drugs, or we talked about pornography addiction, or we can talk about literally anything that is a proliferated pattern that has a short-term reward system and is overused. So there's endless things, but for example, let's just, for the example of withdrawal, let's just talk about alcohol as an example. So withdrawal, again, irritability, mood swings, frustration probably. What else? We can talk about your body is maybe going to have cramps, and you can suffer all kinds of things really from these side effects of withdrawal. And the impact of the long-term view, and we're talking about post detox now, and getting into more of a life balance. This is really something that is that equilibrium, which I wanted to make such a big point of today. After you get through these withdrawal symptoms that are not going to be any fun, because withdrawal is never fun from anything. Every time you change something in your life, you're going to have some kind of withdrawal symptom. That's just the way it is. Sometimes it's minor to the point where you don't even notice it. Sometimes it's more intense, like when you use drugs regularly or whatever, and then you have to let them go. So that is literally a chemical you're putting in your body. It's not naturally created in that circumstance or in that amount or in that capacity, and you're removing it after you used it for maybe weeks, months, years on end, and now your body is adapting to not having it anymore. So you can expect that is not going to just change your mental view on the world, but it's actually going to change your physiology at a deep level. But it's going to change it for the better, because you are saying that I'm willing to let go of this need to have these chemicals with me all the time, and you're learning to release them. So I could say, I can have them, I can use them in the capacity that I want, after you've detoxed and after you've seen that, okay, in this capacity it's actually healthy, in this capacity it's actually not. So you're able to find that line by resetting the baseline dopamine. And it's really interesting actually how these neurotransmitters work, especially dopamine, because when you get that dopamine hit from drugs or your phone, pornography, whatever it is, you actually go up, you ride the wave up to the top, and then you get the release, and you actually drop below baseline. You drop below baseline. You don't go to baseline, you go below baseline. So resetting yourself so that you can find that equilibrium wave, where it's actually in a healthy amount, is imperative for you building that overall mood stabilization, which again, serotonin helps with. If I was going to detox from any of these things, what I would do is I would exercise, I would go out in the sunlight. I would say that, okay, maybe you can't, let's have an example. I can't drink, or I can't smoke weed, or I can't do anything like that. What I can do is I could go outside. I can, have a bit of exercise or do some activities, maybe, play a sport, do some self-reflection. Even just sitting outside can be the most peaceful and most calming thing that we really don't do too much of, because we do get sucked into these patterns. But when we take a step back, which happens every once in a while, because you get a reality check essentially, and you say that, okay, well, let's really figure out who we are without any of these external factors, without medication, without without our phone, without whatever it is. And you really get to find out how stable and how steady and how calm you can actually be when you don't have this overstimulation. This will be the word of the day, almost. The overstimulation, overstimulation of all these factors that produce these chemicals. And when you do that, you're saying to the body that it's okay for the receptors, for the dopamine receptors, for the serotonin receptors, for the endorphin receptors, and maybe the cannabinoid receptors if you're somebody who likes to smoke weed or whatever. I don't know what the actual name for the receptors are for alcohol, but you get the idea that all these receptors in the body can then reset themselves, because the body is saying, okay, we don't have the chemicals needed to create this effect anymore, so we need to find a way to repolarize and find that equilibrium again, really. Find that equilibrium again, that balance, and that unity within oneself, without any of those external factors impacting you. So by doing this, we can really see how we change our life overall, and our goals will become more clear, because we're not getting short releases that we would have after achieving a goal, even though we really didn't achieve a goal, because scrolling on TikTok is not a goal, in my personal opinion, again. So we can really see that we have the ability to accomplish a lot more than we thought we did, because we're not wasting it on addictive behaviors that don't serve us. But because we've become so accustomed to that, because we get so sucked into the material world, we don't analyze those things. But taking a step back, this is maybe what the whole show today is about, just taking a step back and saying, what's the worst that can happen if I let myself take a break from whatever it is that's overloading my dopamine system? What's the worst that can happen? You don't use your phone for 2 weeks, maybe. You don't watch pornography for 2 weeks. You don't have a drink for 2 weeks. That's maybe the worst thing that can happen. And do you think anything bad will come of that? Most likely not. If you have friends texting you, they might wonder why you've been radio silent. But besides that, I think you're okay. And I think that really internalizing a lot of these factors kind of aid in us building that person that we want to be. And this is really what this whole show is about, going to that next level of consciousness and analyzing things on a deep level, so we can say that if we take a step back from who we are right now in this moment, who do we have the potential to be? You know, who can we develop ourselves into, right? But you can't see that when you're always like, when you're in mission mode, essentially. Because when you're releasing dopamine, when you're getting those dopamine hits, when you're scrolling on TikTok, you're still in mission mode. You're still looking for something. Even though you don't know what it is, that's why you're scrolling, but you're still looking for something. So realizing that sometimes you don't have to be looking for anything. Sometimes you can just relax. Sometimes it's okay to just take a break and, feel the wind, feel the breeze, feel the air, feel the sunlight. Sometimes it's just okay to take a break, and, nobody's going to judge you for it. If anything, people should probably applaud you for it, because it does take a lot of willpower to detox from these things, and it's to be commended, even though we don't typically realize that. There should be a whole class on dopamine detox really in today's society, so we can learn how to strengthen our focus and our attention span and prolong it for longer durations of time. So it's unbelievable how short some people's attention spans are, and we do it to ourselves. The essence of this reality, it's a cliche saying, but we really are our own worst enemies. And the way that you defeat that, the way that you overcome that struggle, is by transmuting yourself, transcending yourself into a greater person. And doing that takes some amount of willpower. And that is so important when it comes to overcoming blockages, overcoming mental blockages, overcoming addiction. Any person, I can't stress this enough, any person who has been through these things is going to cultivate willpower within themselves, and it's going to make you a stronger human being. And I can't stress this enough, that all the tools that you need to become the best version of yourself, you already have. So all you have to do is unlock it, and all you have to do is realize who you want to be and decide what it's going to be. And I think this is one of the things kind of left out of this, that willpower is the thing that decides. Willpower and determination, which again is dulled by dopamine, is the essential thing for overcoming this dopamine addiction. And it's kind of ironic that the thing that dopamine actually takes from you when it's overused is the thing you need to overcome it. So it's kind of a funny thing that comes full circle. So understanding that, there's all these different things we can do. We can do exercise. We can increase our brain's neuroplasticity naturally by doing things like juggling. We can do all sorts of yoga. We can do meditation. We can do self-reflection. We can journal. We can read a book instead of, scrolling on TikTok. We can even listen to an audiobook. That is something that is probably, when it comes to a phone, that's one of the least stimulating things you can actually do in terms of something that you can actually use your phone to do, because a lot of the things that we do on phones are really engaging that dopamine reward system, because you are on your phone and instinctually you open Instagram or you open TikTok or whatever. Sometimes you don't even have a reason for it. But by going through this process, by overcoming this dopamine addiction, you start to find reason again. You start to find purpose again. And this is what I said is linked to that serotonin release. Your you're finding purpose again. And what that means, or what that might look like, is that once you have kind of overcome this barrier, you start to do things with more intention. So, for example, you're going to say you're on your phone and you're opening Instagram. You're going to do it for a reason. You're going to do it because you're, maybe trying to send a message to somebody, or you're trying to see something that somebody sent you. Or if you're opening TikTok, maybe you're posting something, and then right after you post, you close the application. But you have a plan, and you're executing the plan, even if it's a short-term plan, because this is the essential essence of this reward system, that it's the ability to make a plan and execute the plan. But when you overuse the pathway, you lose the ability to do that as efficiently and as accurately as you possibly can. So really understanding that these shape not just how we feel and how we act, but ourselves as a human being over time is essential. And I'm not saying that you can never be sustaining some kind of dopamine issue, or you can never scroll on your phone or never scroll on TikTok. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that taking a break every once in a while is not the worst thing in the world. And that's really what we're here to discuss today. And, it's pretty much down to the last 10-15 minutes of the show, so I'm going to try and wrap this up a bit. But again, we've covered a lot. We've covered dopamine as a feel-good hormone that basically says that I want more, and I want more, and I want more, and it doesn't know when to stop typically. We've covered serotonin, the one that feels good and says that, okay, that's enough. I've had enough. I know when to stop. Just like sitting out in the sunlight. If it starts to get really hot out there, like it typically is getting outside right now, we say that, okay, well, I'm starting to sweat really intensely. It's time to pack it in. So you're not going to sit out there until you're cooked. But one of the last things I would like to discuss here, which relates to that concept of equilibrium, actually is connected to a study they did in rats. And they found that, it was either rats or mice, but these physiological systems are actually similar to human beings, which is why they do tests on mice and rats. But essentially what they found was rats or mice that had some kind of trauma or some kind of impact to them in the past were most likely or most commonly to seek out these pathways of addiction. And they actually had an experiment in which the rat would eat. I don't know if it was they pushed a button to get some kind of reward, or they were eating something that was an addictive chemical. But what they found was the rats who had some kind of psychological issues or had some kind of impacts of trauma in the past were the ones to actually seek out these forms of addictive dopamine. And what they found was a lot of the rats would just hit the dopamine button until they died. Because of the poison substance or whatever that was in it. But what they also found was that the rats who did not have these issues, that did not have this psychological or physiological trauma, did not seek out these chemicals. They, maybe had it once and then they left it because they didn't have that need within the body for it. They were able to sustain themselves as how they were. So we can really see how addiction and dopamine and detoxing are important concepts to understand if one is going to advance their life, because the fact is we all do have trauma in some sense. We all do have mental obstacles that we overcome, and understanding that those shape who we are, depending on whether we overcome them or succumb to them, is imperative to understand. So really realizing that we have the potential to shape our own destiny, and we can be in that spot of the animal that does not have to take the drug, does not rely on the external substance for some kind of inner fulfillment, is essential to make us who we are, is essential to make us the best possible version of ourselves. And once we realize that, once we fulfill that by going through these tough challenges, stepping back, exercising our willpower, what we do is we ascend to our greatest potential. And that's really something very special within a human being. And I'm actually glad that I got through a lot of this content today, because I really wanted to touch on that point, that this is all about becoming more capable and more advanced and a greater human being by overcoming these difficulties. And not I don't mean greater as in comparing yourself to anyone else. I mean greater as in comparing yourself to yourself. Because let me tell you, if you want to look for an enemy or a nemesis, look in the mirror and you'll find something to wrestle with. You'll find something to battle against, or overcome rather, because you're not fighting yourself. You're learning how to accept yourself, how to be vulnerable with yourself, and how to be authentic, and how to overcome things. And that is something truly special. And to speak from the point of view of somebody who's gone through these processes and overcome a lot of these challenges, not even probably once, but multiple times in life, it is something really special to see who you become on the other side of those challenges. And I think that you'll figure that out for yourself when you have gone through this process. And all I can do is provide you all this insight that I've experienced and I've found has worked for me, and I can support it with the studies that I've done research on. And I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day long, really, but it comes down to, do you want to put in the willpower that you need to make it happen? And that's really the only question that you need to ask yourself, because they don't talk about willpower when it comes to detoxing. They don't talk about, these different factors of, psychological trauma and physiological trauma, and really what creates the addiction or the need for something external in the first place. It means you feel that something is missing. And when something is missing, it's not out there. It's not something tangible. It's not something physical. It's not in physicality. We are energetic beings, and there are things that exist that we cannot see. And it only stands to reason that a lot of these blockages are formed by something internally or within a part of ourselves. So you're never going to be able to overcome some kind of blockage by, taking a pill or taking a drug or, watching pornography or scrolling on TikTok or shooting down your reward system in your brain. That is never going to solve any kind of deep-rooted issue, unless you're, looking for some kind of just short release system because you have not exercised that pathway in a long time. And I'm not saying don't do any of these things, and I'm not encouraging it either, but I'm saying that everything has a time and place. But if that time and place is all the time, there might be something that is going awry or going wrong. So understanding that everything has a time and place, and everything in moderation. And one of the things that I really wanted to say just near the end of this show, because we're wrapping it up today, is know your limits. So I think that is it for today. And this is pretty much the end of our show. And, I look forward to seeing you back here next week. As always, you can follow me on Instagram at TopSorcerer. And as always, I'm just here to do my best to assist you and give you what you need. I'm here to provide you the tools. I'm not here to make you use them. I'm here to provide you the information. You take it and do what you want with it. I'm not trying to convince you to believe anything. I'm not going to convince you with promises. I'm just going to tell you what has worked for me, and I'm going to be vulnerable and unhurt and authentic with my experiences, so maybe you can take something from it too. And as always, this is Moonstruck Podcast, and I'll see you next week.